All right, so today we're going deep on a topic that I think is really, in a lot of ways, kind of front and center right now in India.
Yeah.
It's this idea of nationalism,
Hmm.
and it's such a complex thing in a country like India with so much history, so many different voices and perspectives.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating to see it play out right now,
Yes,
especially with
especially I mean,
what's happening in the news.
yeah, with what's going on politically,
Right.
and we thought it'd be really interesting to dive into um, one particular event that happened just recently with the All India Congress Committee,
Hmm.
the AICC gathering that happened in Gujarat just last week on April 9th.
Yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah, and it was on the banks of the Sabarmati River, which is, of course, super symbolic given, Gandhi and everything.
Oh, yeah. I mean, talk about a loaded location, right?
Yeah,
Historically.
exactly. And
Yeah.
the Congress released their NIPATH resolution there, which is their path of justice resolution. And what's so interesting to me about this is that it's not just them laying out like, here's our political agenda.
Yeah.
Here are the things we want to do.
Right.
It's really them trying to articulate like what their definition of nationalism is.
I think that's a great way to put it.
And especially, juxtaposing that against what the BJP and the RSS are putting forward.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely see themselves as sort of in opposition to that other, the sort of BJP RSS vision of
Right.
what India should be.
And what nationalism should be.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's get into it.
Right.
Like when the Congress talks about nationalism,
Mhm.
what are like the core, pillars of that for them?
Well, I think you hit on one of them already, which is justice.
Okay.
That seems to be really central to their idea
Yeah,
of
social justice, political justice, economic justice.
all of the above, yeah.
Okay.
They really emphasize that a nation can't be strong unless it's also fair.
Right.
They use this analogy of a tightly woven fabric,
Mhm.
where each thread represents a different community or a different background.
Okay.
And they say that nationalism is the strength of that weave.
Hmm.
It's what binds everyone together.
And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and they're very clear that it's not just about, the physical borders of India.
Right. Yeah.
It's about this shared sense of belonging that all Indians should have, regardless of their differences.
Right. So it's about the people more than just the map.
Exactly.
And this justice piece, like they're not just saying, okay, we all live here together.
Yeah.
They're saying everybody deserves a fair shot.
Yeah, they want to see everyone have opportunities
Yeah.
to live a good life, to prosper.
Give me a concrete example of what that might look like.
Well, they talk about, making sure that a farmer in Punjab
Okay.
has the same access to resources and opportunities as, say, a software engineer in Bangalore. It's about creating that level playing field so that everyone can succeed.
Yeah, and that success of the individual then feeds into the success of the nation as a whole.
That's the idea. Yeah. It's about the collective good.
And they talk a lot about, protecting the rights of marginalized communities.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge part of it.
And making sure that progress is inclusive.
Yeah, for them, nationalism can't just be about, the majority
Right.
or the most powerful groups.
It has to.
It has to include everyone.
Yeah, it's got to lift everyone up.
Exactly.
Okay, so justice is clearly like a big thing.
Big time.
What else is central to their vision?
Well, they talk a lot about fraternity
Okay.
and brotherhood and this idea of pluralism, which is, this idea that India's strength comes from its diversity,
Right.
from all these different cultures and religions and languages all coexisting.
So it's not just about tolerating each other.
No, it's about embracing that diversity
Yeah.
and seeing it as a source of richness and strength.
And I mean that's kind of baked into India's DNA, right?
Yeah, I mean, you look at India history, and it's always been this incredibly diverse place.
Right from the very beginning.
Yeah, it's a melting pot of cultures.
Yeah.
And the Congress sees that as something to be celebrated.
So they've got this vision of nationalism that's very much tied to justice, to inclusivity,
Yeah.
to celebrating this diversity.
Absolutely.
But they also have some pretty strong opinions on how the BJP and the RSS are approaching nationalism.
Oh, yeah. They do not hold back.
It's not pulling any punches.
No.
And what's at the core of their critique?
Well, they basically accuse the BJP and the RSS of promoting a kind of nationalism that's actually divisive rather than unifying.
Okay.
They actually use the term pseudo-nationalism to describe it,
Wow.
which is a pretty loaded term.
Yeah, and what do they mean by that?
Well, they're suggesting that it's not really about love for the country
Okay.
so much as it's about using this idea of nationalism
Wow.
to create divisions in society.
And to consolidate their own political power.
So where the Congress sees nationalism as that friendship bracelet that we talked about,
Right.
they see the BJP and the RSS as kind of like trying to break those threads.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to visualize it.
And they're very critical of this idea that the BJP and RSS seem to be pushing of kind of erasing India's diversity
Right.
and trying to impose a more homogenous identity.
Yeah, they absolutely call them the Grinches of pluralism at one point,
Yeah, that's a good one.
which I thought was pretty funny.
So they really see that as a threat.
Yeah, they see it as a real danger to the kind of inclusive India that they envision.
Okay, and then there's this analogy that they use about musical chairs
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
to describe how they think the BJP and the RSS kind of operate.
Do you explain that one?
Yeah, so the way I understand it is they're saying that the BJP and the RSS are constantly changing the rules of the game about who is and isn't considered a true Indian
Right.
based on things like religion or caste.
And so people are always kind of like scrambling.
Yeah, like they're trying to figure out where they
Right.
stand.
And who's in and who's out.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
it creates this climate of fear and uncertainty.
Right. And the Congress is arguing that this is a deliberate strategy.
Yeah, to keep people divided.
Yeah. And to hold on to power
Right.
by making sure that there's always some group that feels like they're on the outside.
That's a pretty cynical view, but I can see where they're coming from.
Yeah. And then they bring up this historical point, which I thought was really interesting.
What's that?
They basically point out that the ideological predecessors of the BJP and the RSS, didn't really participate in the independence movement,
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
and specifically the Quit India movement in 1942. And it's almost like they're saying, look, we were out there, fighting for freedom,
Right.
and now you're trying to question our patriotism.
Yeah, it's a way of kind of challenging their legitimacy.
Yeah, like who are you to be handing out nationalism certificates kind of thing?
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
So it's a pretty pointed critique.
It is.
And then they go on to talk about some pretty serious allegations.
Yeah, about how the BJP and the RSS operate.
Yeah, in terms of like how they wield power
Mm-hmm.
and even their finances.
Yeah, they use some pretty strong language there.
Yeah, they talk about spreading hatred to grab power.
Uh-huh.
And they even accuse them of, raid, invade, and extort donations.
Which is pretty serious charge.
Yeah.
I mean, they're basically accusing them of corruption.
And they contrast that with their own self-image.
Yeah.
Where they portray themselves as the defenders of India's soul.
Right.
The guardians of its true values.
The champions of pluralism
Yeah.
and liberalism.
So it's a very stark contrast they're painting.
It is. It's very black and white.
Yeah.
Us versus them.
Okay, so we've talked about their critique of the BJP and the RSS.
Mm-hmm.
But the NIPATH resolution also lays out some specific things that the Congress is committed to doing.
So what are some of the key promises or stances that they're taking?
Well, one of the big ones is their pledge to resist what they call anti-constitution forces.
Okay, and who are they talking about there?
It's pretty clear they're talking about the BJP and the RSS.
Okay, so they see them as a threat to the Constitution itself.
Yeah, that's their argument.
And they're also very opposed to this idea of centralizing power.
Yeah,
Like they specifically mention one nation, one election.
right. They see that as undermining India's federal structure.
And they're big on federalism.
Huge. Yeah, they want to see more power devolve to the states.
Okay, and what about on specific issues like Jammu and Kashmir, for example?
Well, they reiterate their commitment to restoring full statehood to Jammu and Kashmir,
Mm-hmm.
which is a pretty big deal given the current situation.
Yeah.
They also talk about the need for a fair and impartial education system, one that's free from ideological bias.
Okay, so they're concerned about what's happening with the curriculum.
Yeah, they seem to be suggesting that the current government is trying to push a particular agenda
Right.
through the education system.
And they talk about equitable delimitation too, right?
Yes, they do.
Which is about making sure that electoral constituencies are drawn fairly
Right.
so that everyone's vote has equal weight.
Exactly.
Okay, so they've laid out all these things that they're committed to, but they also talk a lot about the NDA alliance,
Yeah.
which is this coalition of opposition parties.
Right.
And why is that so important to them?
Well, I think they see it as the only way to effectively challenge the BJP.
Okay.
They're trying to present a united front
Yeah.
to offer voters a real alternative.
So it's not just about the Congress's vision.
Right.
It's about this broader coalition.
Exactly.
Now, all this might seem very like inside baseball.
Yeah, political maneuvering.
Yeah, but why should somebody who's not, a political junkie,
Right.
why should they care about all this?
Well, I think the Congress is trying to frame this as something much bigger than just politics.
Yeah.
They're saying this is about the future of India,
Mm.
about the kind of society we want to live in.
Yep.
Do we want a society that's inclusive and tolerant,
Right.
or do we want one that's divided and fractured?
Yeah, and they're arguing that their vision of nationalism
Mm-hmm.
is the only way to achieve that kind of unity and harmony.
Right.
So it's not just about abstract ideas.
No.
It's about how we actually live together.
Exactly. It's about our everyday lives
Right.
and the kind of country we want to leave for our children.
And it all comes down to this fundamental question of what it means to be Indian,
Yeah.
right? Like, is it about embracing this incredible diversity that
Mhm.
India has always had? Or is it about trying to impose a more singular identity?
Right.
A single color flag, as the Congress puts it.
Yeah, that's a powerful image.
Yeah, and this NIPATH resolution
Mm-hmm.
is really their attempt to kind of stake their claim in that debate.
Yeah, it's their manifesto for a pluralistic and inclusive India.
So to wrap it all up,
Go ahead.
we've got these two very different visions of nationalism.
We do.
On the one hand, we've got the Congress,
Mm-hmm.
who are saying that nationalism is about justice,
Right.
about pluralism,
Mm-hmm.
about celebrating India's diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, you've got the BJP and the RSS,
Mm-hmm.
who the Congress is accusing of promoting a more divisive kind of nationalism,
Right.
one that they say is based on exclusion and fear.
And so the question for all of us is, which path do we want to take?
Right.
What kind of India do we want to build?
It's a big question,
It is a huge question.
and it's one that we all have a stake in answering.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep
And
dive.
that's my pleasure.
Really appreciate your insights.
Okay.
And for our listeners out there, keep thinking about this question.
Yeah, it's an important one.
What does it really mean to be Indian in the 21st century? It's a conversation that we all need to be having.
I agree.
So until next time, thanks for listening.
Take care.